Welcome everyone to the Graduate Professional Development Series. My name is Mary Wood. I'm a program director in the graduate school. We're really happy that you are joining us today. Today's session is Public Speaking Part 2, Speaking Online. Last week we had Part 1, which was public speaking in person. Today we learn about engaging a virtual audience, a very timely and relevant topic. Our presenter is Dr. Anita Mixon. Dr. Mixon is an assistant professor in the Department of Communication and the College of Fine, Performing, and Communication Arts. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Dr. Mixon.
Great, thank you. And thanks to the Graduate School for offering the Professional Development Series. These have been great so far. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the participants for joining today. So what I'd like to do, which is customary to most of my presentations, is I like to do a reflection activity at first. This allows my audience to kind of warm up to the topic, but it also allows me to gauge what areas that I should emphasize in the workshop. So I'll give you about 5 minutes to reflect on these 3 questions, thinking about the differences between in-person speaking and online speaking. Which do you prefer and why? And then finally, if you've given a speech or recorded a video for an online use, how satisfied were you with the results? And I'll give you about 5 minutes to work through that. We'll give you a couple of more minutes to think and reflect on those questions, and then we'll circle back as a group. Okay, so who would like to volunteer to talk about some of their reflection from the activity? So who would like to talk about kind of the differences that they believe that there are between public speaking in a public space and public speaking, or in a physical space, and public speaking in an online space? Sure. Kiara Betsway.
Oh, good afternoon. Thank you for this presentation again. I'd say of the bat, without hesitation, I prefer in-person presentation because I am a person who feeds off people's energy being there, and I think that fuels me as a person who's presented in conferences, who teaches. So I've seen, as I've been teaching online and the conferences that I've attended online, I really didn't enjoy it as much as I enjoy in-person presentation. And yeah, and I think also like there's a thing that goes in my mind. I don't know if it happens to everyone, where I think that people aren't as interested or they aren't engaging, or they, I'm not giving them my best. So it's like this thing is not as I would imagine that it should go. So I definitely enjoy in person, but I'd like to say I prefer obviously in person, but that's why I'm here today, because I believe that these are the times and I have to adapt. And I know myself, once I have learned something, a skill, and I have engaged and, given myself an opportunity to practice, and yeah, I'll probably like it and be at my best. Thank you.
Thank you. Louis, did you want to add?
Yes, actually. See, the thing is this: when you don't present in person, you are lacking that formality aspect, that aspect that will help you train yourself to become part of the world, when you actually hold conferences in real life. So if you do online a lot of lectures, you are missing a part of what is needed or necessary to evolve yourself in the workplace. So a lot of people think that, oh, it's easy, I'll just talk to people on a screen. But when you do it in person, you must shape yourself, and that's the thing, that shaping aspect is not present in for online speaking. So yeah, people can get away with that.
Great. Those are both really great points. And it's important to note that what I think both of you are talking about is the audience, the aspect of the audience. And we'll talk about that today. We'll talk about how do we engage with an audience? How do we give a presentation where the interaction isn't the same as if it were in a physical space? So thank you for sharing. Okay, so let's get started and let's talk about first how the presentation will flow for today. So we'll talk about some of the similarities and the differences between online speaking and speaking in person, as well as the type of presentations that you give online, the advantages and disadvantages. We certainly talk about audience, because audience is always important and always a focal point of public speaking. We'll give you some tips on composing and facilitating an online presentation, along with preparing for technology failures, and then a final note about privacy, because it's something that's a bit different when we're giving a presentation online than it is in person. Do you have any questions before we get started? Okay.
Anita, we did have a question from Rochelle.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, someone in the chat answered the question. I was looking for the option to raise a hand. I had a comment, but the two speakers, pretty much the participants, spoke about what my concerns were about both public and online speaking. So
Okay, great. Thanks, Rochelle. Okay, any other questions before we move forward? Okay. So in general, when you're preparing for both a in-person and a speech or a presentation online, there will be two things that you will do regardless of that modality. So you would always want to make sure that you're comfortable with the content. So you're still going to do the preparation, you're still going to do the research. You also want to make sure that you're comfortable with the delivery. That includes practicing, looking at models that you might emulate, and then of course, making sure that you're comfortable with the technology or the equipment that you plan to use. In terms of online presentations, they have many advantages. So you can save time and money because those constraints aren't necessarily there in an online environment. You also have the ability to increase your audience size without worrying about the physical space limitations. And then you can allow your audience to view your presentation when it's most convenient to them. So similar to what the presentation last week talked about in terms of setup and logistics, though this presentation is being presented live, it will then be uploaded and available for viewing after the presentation is over and concludes for today. So it does allow people to be able to see a presentation beyond the kind of live experience. There are three types of online presentations. They include speeches, podcasts, and videos, and they're broadcast on a computing device such as a cellular phone, a computer, laptop, etc. So while there are advantages, oh, Louis, I think we have a question.
I just wanted to know, at Oakland University, when I went to that university back then, about some years ago, I'm going to say that, I'm not going to say when, but they used to give me a technology, like a camera or something to help me create a lecture for my composition course. I'm wondering, at Wayne State is there a place I can go at Wayne State to give me a camera or some type of technology to create a lecture for a certain English course or something like that?
So in terms of, you mean like equipment?
Yes.
Is there a place? Yes. So you can rent equipment through the library. You can also, the Office of Teaching and Learning also has a space that you can record presentations in. So there are a couple of places that you could potentially do that. We do have a public speaking lab here in Manugian Hall that you can practice in as long as you book an appointment with our assistant basic course director. So there are a few places that you might be able to assist you with doing online presentations outside of, just on your own. So again, the library, you have the ability to rent equipment. The Office of Teaching and Learning has a space that you're able to use to record. And then the public speaking lab that we have here in Manugian Hall is a great space for you to practice and getting used to kind of the equipment that you'll be using in your presentations. It's a nice, good question. Okay, so in addition to the kind of advantages that we talked about, there's the space limitations. We don't necessarily have an online speaking environment. We don't have the same kind of time and money constraints that we have in a physical space. There are disadvantages to giving a presentation online. And the main disadvantages are two: eye contact and tonal variation. So when you're creating and delivering an online presentation, you have to work harder to appear animated, and you probably have to use more hand gestures online than you would in person. So you will work on alternating your pitch, your tone, your volume, the rhythm of your speech, and so on. They will need to be a bit more pronounced in an online presentation than you would necessarily do in a face-to-face presentation. And that helps you to appear lively on audiences' screens and on speakers. In terms of eye contact, the presentation will be available from the graduate school. I'm not sure when it will be uploaded, but there will be one that's available for the person who responded in the chat. But last week I talked about, looking at various parts of the audience. That doesn't translate in an online environment. So you'll need to make sure that when you're giving a presentation or you're recording a video, that you maintain eye contact with the lens camera. That allows or creates the illusion that you are looking directly at the person who is viewing the speaking event. There are two types of online presentations, which are synchronous and asynchronous. We've been through, unfortunately, a pandemic. So that means most of us should be pretty familiar with these two formats. One is live in real time, whereas asynchronous is pre-recorded and it's viewed whenever the recipient chooses to view it. Synchronous presentations include webinars, videocasts, and screencasts. For those of you who are not familiar with a screencast, one way that you might do a screencast if you're using Zoom is that you, instead of selecting the option with video when you're doing a meeting, you'll do with screen share only. And so it would only show the screen would only show what's presented, not necessarily a video icon of the person speaking, but only what's being shown from the desktop of the computer or device that you're using. That takes place real time. It includes streaming video and webinars. Streaming video is different from webinars. So we're currently in what would be referred to as a webinar because we are interactive. We're using interactive tools. It's happening real time. A streaming video would not necessarily interact with the audience, very limited interaction with the audience, versus your online meetings, your video casting and screencasting, where you're able to interact with the chat feature, use the reaction tools, etc. Asynchronous presentations, they also have limitations. You're unable to interact with the audience, which means if someone asks a question while they're watching your pre-recorded message, you can't adjust or change your presentation in the midst or after that question. So you can't adjust it based on feedback during the course of the presentation. But the advantage is that you get to practice and edit and redo your presentation or podcast as many times as you like before you upload it. So it allows you to be able to carefully prepare. The formats for asynchronous, again, videos, podcasts, podcasts. Podcasts are they're very much the same as podcasts, except they have the images or video clips. So not necessarily of the speaker, but they'll have images and video clips inserted, and that's what actually makes it a podcast. So a final note, the advantages of online presentations is that it saves time. There's certainly more flexibility in terms of space, location, time, particularly if it's asynchronous, and they can be edited. The disadvantages of online presentations can seem like a lot, but I don't want to prevent you from being encouraged to use online presentations because they do have such great advantages. But the very first kind of glaring disadvantage is technology failure. So a loss of connection or a software glitch or hardware failure. And one of the reasons I'm here on campus today is I wanted to make sure that my connection wasn't lost in giving a presentation on online presentations. So I encourage you to, if you're interested in doing a recorded presentation or giving a live presentation, that you are in a space or a place that has reliable internet connection. There are sensory limitations, so the lack of the audience feedback, and it may come across as a more stiff presentation than one that's in face-to-face and a lack of vocal variation. And I think when we're talking about delivery issues in terms of presentation, that is one of the things that Louis brought up in his feedback about, the challenges between in-person and online presenting. So now that we've talked about, the kinds of presentations, whether it's synchronous, asynchronous, and advantages and disadvantages, let's talk about the audience, because the audience is a very big part of public speaking. Online speaking, you don't have the ability to know who the people are that make up your group or your audience or your participants, especially when you might be uploading a video or a podcast and it's pre-recorded, so you certainly won't know who signs in and who views it as you're giving the speech. So when you're creating or crafting a message for an audience that you don't have the ability to know, some of the things that you should ask yourself is, what kind of audience do I want for my message? And what audience would I like to create for what I say? So when I was putting together the presentation, part of my goal was to meet kind of a happy medium between people who have experience speaking online, and those who don't speak online or who have questions about how they might become better at speaking online. And that's how I crafted or created my message with that in mind. So when you are thinking about your online speaking event, I also encourage you to think about a happy medium between those who are more seasoned and those who might be beginners that are coming to your topic, to listen to your topic or your content. The primary goal of an amorphous audience is publicity, and it refers to the distribution and circulation of information is what we mean when we say publicity. And the two concepts that are central to publicity is circulation and promotion. So that circulation, of course, refers to the way in which a message is taken up by an audience member through repeated listening or viewing. And then promotion is primarily about creating an audience for the secondary goal of entertaining, informing, or persuading. And so that's kind of the primary goal for an amorphous audience. Okay, so let's talk about like the nitty-gritty, the composing and facilitating online presentations. So when we're giving an online presentation or a face-to-face presentation, the goals really do remain the same. We want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to pay attention to our aesthetics, and we always want to make sure that we prepare for backups. You should always have a backup plan for equipment failure, especially if your online presentation will be live. And in order to be an effective online speaker, you want to think about the messages that you've enjoyed watching and that were memorable, and aim toward crafting your message with similar qualities. Again, similar to a face-to-face presentation, you want to make sure that your presentation reflects who you are as a speaker. And so I didn't say same qualities, I said similar qualities, because it's important that your voice is a part of the public sphere and the public space. There are four kind of aesthetics that you should consider when you're composing an online video. That's lighting, color, composition, and sound. When we're talking about lighting, we really are talking about the lighting that you have in your space. So you want to make sure that one of the things that you have to understand about lighting, in particular with cameras, is that most cameras cannot register or see the variations between light and dark. So when you're filming, you want to make sure that you're in a space that's brighter in light than you're normally accustomed to in a real space, so in a physical space. This is especially important for those of us who have darker skin, because cameras cannot pick up the light and dark as well on darker skin. You also want to make sure that you control for glare and shadows. One way that you can control glare and shadows is using three-point lighting. Three-point lighting is essentially a key light, a backlight, and a fill light. A key light is the light that's kind of like in front of you. Your backlight, of course, is behind you. And then your fill light is the light that's in between your key light and your backlight. Often that source is a light that's beside you. So if you were to position your lighting in a room with, let's say, a ring light in front of you, you have some natural light from a window behind you, and then position a lamp on the right or left to give you fill light. In terms of color, in online environments, color communicates information, and you want to experiment to determine what colors look best. You don't want something that might give you the appearance of being washed out or too distracting. And you want to make sure that you consider what ways that your wardrobe might complement your message or complement your background. You want to choose colors that show up well visually. So composition, movement, and background in terms of the camera are important. When we're talking about composition, it simply refers to the way in which you position yourself or present yourself in the frame of a screen. Typically, when we're giving an online presentation or a video, speakers tend to orient themselves in the center of the screen. And that's a cue to the audience to pay attention to what the speaker does or says. In terms of movement of the camera, you want to make sure that your camera is actually stable and steady. Positioning the camera at eye level helps you to give eye contact by looking at the lens camera, but it also presents a pretty even image of who the person is or the speaker is in the presentation moment. So the angle does not present an image that is distracting or that casts more shadows. Because again, light is very important when you're giving an online presentation. And then finally, your background. Some people like to do some type of background in terms of a filter. I would caution against using busy filters or filters that detract from your message. You can certainly blur if there's quite a bit in your background, but opt for neutral if you're going to have something in the background of your presentation, something that's neutral or something that isn't too busy and doesn't detract from your presentation. It should be appropriate for the situation. And then the fourth aesthetic, which is sound. You want to make sure that you ensure audibility. So checking to make sure that your volume is up as high as possible on your recording device. You might also use kind of a Bluetooth headset, which will help to eliminate background noise, but also help to amplify your voice if perhaps the speaking or the recording device that you have isn't really that great at tracking the volume. If you are giving a presentation that doesn't include your video, so let's say you chose the option of just having sound and a PowerPoint, but no image of yourself as the speaker at all, you want to make sure that you structure your word choice in sound-only messages to substitute for color and composition. So simply what I mean by that is we have a PowerPoint presentation. So let's say we're doing a podcast. And I want to make sure that my audience follows along in the transition of my presentation in the podcast. Well, with a podcast, there are no images, there's no video clip, there's no speaker that you see, you're simply listening to the words. One way that you might help your audience move along your presentation is using enumeration. So first, we'll talk about this. Second, we'll talk about that. Strong and clear transitions. And then finally, we'll close with this. This helps keep the audience on track, but it's also a part of sound because it is the only thing that your audience has access to.
And Anita, we did have a comment come in from Hannah who
Okay.
writes, movement is a very big issue. And Kim had a question. How do you navigate looking directly at the camera while reading your script or notes?
Yes, and I'm the one who said about the movement, and I meant the movement, not of the camera, but personal movement, body movement on screen. And the reason I'm saying it, I experienced during the interview season while we interviewed candidates, when people move a bit too much or use gestures, and it is very, very distracting and throws off people who are viewing you. I think you have to be very mindful that you're on camera and how much you're moving.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Now, we do want to make sure that there is natural movement, right? Because a part of speaking online or speaking on the internet is that you have to engage your audience in a very different way than you would, say, in a public or physical space. And so that would require some movement. What we often recommend when someone's giving an online presentation is that movement does not mean that you move outside of the center of the screen. It means that your movements stay within the confines of the center of the screen. And it's more often related to, if you've noticed, I might use one hand gesture or I'm using facial expressions to create animation, etc. Very good point. There was a second one, I believe, Mary. Oh, how do you navigate looking directly at the camera while reading your script, notes, etc.? So as with any presentation, if you're using, and I always encourage using notes, you want to practice the presentation ahead of time. So most of the time you will already know the content, and it will simply be a checking of where you are in the presentation that will help keep your focus on the camera lens. So it really is about practicing to get that technique down. Does that answer your question?
That's all the questions in there right now.
Okay. So as we talk about kind of the online space, we want to make sure that we address the preparing for technology failures, testing the equipment ahead of time. So before you record or before you broadcast yourself live, test and retest your camera, your microphone, and any other software that you intend to use. And you want to make sure that you test that well in advance of your presentation. In terms of backups before recording or broadcasting your presentation, duplicate and back them up. So put them on a flash drive, save them to the OneDrive for cloud storage, save them to your computer or some other kind of device. You want to make sure that you have several places that you have your presentation backed up in the event that you need to use different equipment at the time of your presentation. Always try to select a reliable internet connection. As I mentioned earlier, I chose to come to campus because it's a reliable internet connection for me to be able to give a presentation. And so you want to make sure when you're giving a presentation or interviewing that you have a reliable internet connection. And in addition to practicing with your technology, you want to make sure that if you have hyperlinks or media, you avoid putting them in the presentation and simply have them downloaded to your device. So when you access them in the presentation, you can avoid some of the pitfalls of error messages or blocks that prevent you from being able to present the hyperlinked media. So try to avoid hyperlinked media. Okay, so in addition to practicing, because it's normal, whether it's a face-to-face or an online speaking event, you want to make sure that you're energetic. There's nothing worse than coming to a presentation where the person has a monotone voice and that they don't seem to have any enthusiasm about their topic. So you want to make sure that you're energetic when you're giving your presentation. To be energetic, you want to vary your pitch, you want to vary your volume, your rhythm, and related vocalic elements so that you can bring your presentation to life. You also want to maintain focus on your presentation. So remove anything that might distract you during the course of your presentation, including your cell phone. If it's on vibrate, it still might distract you. So I like to turn my cell phone off or on silent, no vibrate, so it doesn't detract from my message. And I close out of Outlook so I don't get the ping of an Outlook message while I'm giving a presentation. And then finally, keep the audience engaged. One way that you keep the audience engaged is using a visual aid, but it might also be that you break up your presentation, use breakout rooms to have them work on small parts or small content. And when you engage the audience, you might also insert questions in the course of your presentation, or you might ask that they be reserved towards the end of the presentation. But try to use several different ways that you might engage the audience, whether it's the beginning, the middle, or at the end of the presentation.
And Anita, we have a question that came in on online interviewing from Rochelle. She says she noticed that the panel that interviewed me seemed easily distracted and unengaged. What's the best way to handle yourself when you notice you are losing your audience?
That's a really great question. And it's different depending on the speaking situation. So for an interviewing panel, if the interviewers seem to be disengaged from your presentation or from your response to the question, it's a little bit difficult to gauge what that disinterest might be. It might be that they have, interviewed several people before and they're jotting down notes. And so I wouldn't take that as a, kind of personal reflection on how you're presenting, as long as you've prepared yourself adequately for the interview, of course. If you notice that they seem to be a bit disengaged, one way that you might engage them is that you might vary the way that your voice is. You might vary the pitch, or you might vary the tone that you're using in your response. So that might perk them up and get them to look back at the screen. But it's very hard for interviewing when you're taking into consideration an interviewing panel why they seem to be disengaged, because it could be simply that they are taking notes, or they might be thinking about something that you've said. And so you can only control those little smaller parts. But again, I wouldn't take it personal, because interviewing is tough. You clearly, if you're interviewing, you're interested in whatever it is that you've applied to. So I wouldn't take it personal. One of the things that I like to do when I'm giving a presentation, if I'm looking at the camera lens, it's very hard for me to be able to see what everyone else is doing in their screens. And so if you're focusing on the lens camera, you may be able to see, kind of outlines of what people are doing, but you really can't see that they aren't focused on you. And that's one of the beauties of giving a presentation online and using the camera lens as your eye contact. I hope that sort of answers your question. It's just really difficult when you are doing an interview, how to respond to what can be perceived as someone being not as engaged, when it could be a lot of factors that are outside of your control. Any other questions before I move to nonverbals? Okay. So in terms of nonverbal communication, very similar to face-to-face, your body posture can communicate confidence or a lack of confidence. So you want to make sure that if you're seated in a presentation, that you are sitting as straight as you can. You want to make sure that you're looking at the camera lens. Your facial expression should vary. I think I remember a comment from last week. Someone said that they'd given a presentation and someone made the comment that they should smile in the presentation, which is unfortunate because we don't want to be told to smile. But I do understand that having different facial expressions does help the presentation appear to be more lively. So be conscious of what your facial expressions might be doing when you're giving a presentation. One way that you might see that is recording yourself giving the presentation. And then finally, dress appropriately and comfortably. I'm seated giving this presentation, so the only thing that you can see is my top. You have no idea what I'm wearing in terms of bottom, but I'm making sure that I'm comfortable and that what I'm wearing doesn't distract from the message or the content that I'm giving you all. The final note that I'd like to talk about is the issue of privacy. Even in a face-to-face speaking event, what you shared is assumed to be open and subject to scrutiny, but it's especially so in the internet environment. If you have an asynchronous presentation that's uploaded, you cannot assume that it's private. And once it's posted, it's out there. So be cognizant of the presentations that you present, that you have no control over it once it's out in the online speaking space. Okay, so what questions do you have for me?
Okay, we have a question that came in from Lance. Zoom or Teams? Which is better? Which is more reliable?
That's actually a great question. It depends on what your comfort level is. So if you're used to using Zoom, then you will find that you prefer it over Teams. I've used both Zoom and Teams. I think they both have advantages and disadvantages. The advantages of Zoom is I feel that it's more intuitive with respect to sharing your screen, being able to react to comments versus Microsoft Teams. But that is because most of the time I'm using Zoom. I very rarely use Microsoft Teams unless I'm a participant in a meeting or a presentation that uses Microsoft Teams. I very rarely use it myself for presenting. Microsoft Teams is probably the one that I would say people tend to have more issues with online in terms of connectivity. So I traditionally prefer Zoom because I feel that the ability to be able to give a presentation without interruption is a lot better. I've also noticed if I use a virtual background in Zoom, the virtual background actually is not as good as the virtual background, like blurring in Microsoft Teams. So it just depends on what you're most interested in. So if you're interested in connectivity, that's really an internet kind of question, internet reliability. But when you start adding in those background filters and those backgrounds, like the automated animated backgrounds, Microsoft Teams does a better job of using those backgrounds without using as much of the bandwidth in terms of internet service, I've noticed, particularly with my home internet. Now, if you're on campus, it's really strong, it's really reliable, regardless of the Zoom or Teams platform that you're using. So it really doesn't matter in that respect. But if you're at home, I would certainly suggest Teams for background and filters over Zoom's background and filters, because they seem to take a little bit more of your bandwidth with respect to internet at home.
We have another question from Melanie. When recording a video/audio presentation, how do you get over just nitpicking yourself, continuously re-recording it, since we are our own worst critics?
It's a great question. And I think you hit the nail on the head with we are our own worst critics, right? So no speech is ever perfect. No presentation is ever perfect. And if you've done your due diligence in terms of researching the content and preparing and structuring your presentation, you have to at some point say, this is it. And most often, this is it is related to a deadline, right? So one of the ways that you might look at your presentation that you put together, your recording or your audio recording, is that you know that's not your final one, right? So you're going to give a presentation today. There'll be a presentation or an audio presentation that you'll give later down the road. And give yourself things that you might work on that you don't like in the current presentation for future presentations. So one area that you might not like about your presentation is, let's say you use verbal fillers. Instead of making sure that you eliminate verbal fillers in all parts of your presentation, say to yourself or jot down as a goal, the next presentation, I will work on pausing instead of giving an audible verbal filler, so that I can learn to eliminate them over time. And giving yourself small, kind of manageable goals to use for the next speaking event will help make your presentations a bit more, a bit more lively in terms of being able to engage with the audience. But two, it allows you to have some kinds of things for you to benefit from by giving the presentation. So when we give presentations, people are receiving the content and hopefully enjoying the content that they're receiving. But one of the benefits of you giving a presentation is that you continue to develop and work on these skills that are transferable in a public speaking space or an online speaking space. And so by writing those small, manageable goals for the next opportunity of speaking, you are thereby improving your presentation skills. And that's a benefit to you as a speaker.
Rochelle has a question. Teams is glitchy and freezes too much. What is the most appropriate action to take when this begins to disrupt your presentation while you are presenting?
Yeah, so again, I prefer Zoom, as I said earlier. And I don't use backgrounds in Zoom, because I actually think Microsoft Teams does a better job with backgrounds than Zoom does. But I do understand that Microsoft Teams can be quite glitchy. Unfortunately, your audience may know that that's a typical kind of error that happens in Microsoft Teams. And I think often there is some grace that's afforded to speakers who present online, right, when it comes to technology failures. One way that you might get at that is you might say, we're having a bit of technical difficulties. So in order for us to continue the presentation, if you don't mind, I'm going to turn my video off so that I can preserve some of the bandwidth, and then give a presentation that's more audio than it is with a physical kind of speaker box or screencasting, whatever on your desktop. And for the most part, audiences really root for you when you're giving presentations. There isn't someone in the audience who wants you to do poorly. So I'm sure that your audience would accommodate that, because they're still getting the content. They just may not be able to see you in the moment as the system begins to catch up with perhaps a lag or a glitch. That was a great question.
Our next question is from Hayat. Is it inappropriate not to use camera, especially for those who do not feel comfortable in front of the camera?
In a speaking situation or as an audience participant?
Speaking.
Yeah, that's really a tough one because we often are conditioned to want to see who the speaker is. And I would really probably encourage you to understand what the requirements are for the group or organization or circumstance in which you're giving your presentation. So is there an expectation that you have the camera on? And if there is, unfortunately, you'll have to work on tips on getting more comfortable in front of the camera. I'll tell you one tip that I used that actually worked really well for me to help me look at the lens camera when I'm giving a presentation, but also just to feel a bit more confident when I'm giving speeches online, was to completely get rid of my image. So in Zoom, you can minimize the speaker view where it's just like a line and it says your name's talking and it doesn't show a video of yourself. That's one way that you can kind of get over that discomfort of seeing yourself on video, as well as be able to really focus in on the camera lens. And so that's one tip you might use. But again, I would encourage you, if you are uncomfortable speaking with your video showing, I would reach out to the organizer, whoever is putting on the speaking event, to see what allowances you might have with respect to having a photo of yourself as you're giving your presentation, and a focus more on your presentation aids than on your speaking person.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I think Barbara Jones, yes.
Oh.
Hello, it's just quicker for me to ask my question instead of just typing it in. And Professor Anita, you just segued in your last response to a question that I do have. What advice or tips or tricks would you give when you are presenting and you're doing multiple things, when you're presenting, such as if you have presentation slides, if you're going to show a video? In my experience in public speaking online, you need a team to kind of help you manage the flow on how you present with the different technologies on the technology platform. What advice would you give? Would you just have, people to kind of help you manage, those things when you're presenting?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. Thank you. So you could do it a couple of ways. If you've practiced with slide animation, so your presentation moves without, so you're sharing your screen, you have your presentation, your visual aid present, and you've built an animation where it transitions on its own because you've practiced for a certain amount of time, you certainly can do that. The one drawback of building in, the time before your slide progresses is that if you allow questions during the course of your presentation, it could throw off your timed slides. With respect to so we do have a moderator. So Mary Wood has been very gracious in tracking the chat. And so if you have the ability of assigning that as a task to one of your audience participants, that's a great way to engage an audience participant if you don't have a moderator for a presentation. And it allows the audience too to recognize that you're willing to include them in your presentation by selecting someone who's present in your presentation as an audience member, not as official capacity, as an assistant or anything like that, but it allows you to demonstrate that you are engaging your audience in ways that are allows them to be collaborative in the speaking process. So encouraging someone from the audience who wouldn't mind looking at the chat or checking for hands that are raised is a great way to handle the chat and reaction kind of hand raised questions if you don't have a moderator. A great question. Louis.
Well, back then, when people would make a presentation on PowerPoint, there's an area in the bottom where people could actually type down a few things so that in case they forget something, it reminds them of something they should discuss for the
Right.
presentation. Is there a way how to do that on Zoom?
Yes. So one way that it would still be the same. Zoom is just the way in which we are delivering the content. So it really doesn't affect your presentation aid at all, with the exception that you are screencasting your presentation. But if you connect a second screen, so just a screen, so a second screen in addition to your computer, you can set the settings on your computer to have two screens, so not extending the display, but having two distinct displays. One has the lecture mode, which is what you're referring to, where there's an image, and then you have the notes that prompt you to tell you, what you're going to talk about in this particular slide. And then the other one is screencasted without the notes, which is what we did today. I didn't have a separate screen. I actually like to use my iPad for my keynotes, just because it allows me to be a bit more portable in my presentations when I'm using this, as opposed to a connected second screen. But that would be how you would be able to access, your lecture notes that way.
Okay.
The old-fashioned way is print it, create a presentation, have your notes, and print it out. That's one way. That's the other way that you might be able to do that without the added screen. Thank you.
Thank you.
And it looks like Rochelle has her hand up.
And Rochelle, if you're talking, we can't hear you. You are muted.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
It's
I
okay.
noticed that, you're able to sit directly in front of the screen and that your eyes are not like engaged off of the front view of the camera. So what's the best way to set that up so that that doesn't happen? I noticed that when I'm on Teams sometimes, or the other platform, that tends to happen a lot, especially like when I'm presenting and I have an issue. Even if I, try to set it up before, once I start talking, I see that it appears that my eyes are not looking forward, but they're looking either to the right or to the back. So yeah, how would you do that? Especially if you're holding up an object and you want to show something and it's hard to kind of get it in the center of the frame.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's similar to a question someone asked earlier. And the way that so I wish I could show you how I have my computer set up, but I have it actually on top of two boxes that contain software, so that it's elevated. It's higher than my chest is actually in line with my eyesight, so it's eye level. And that's one way, because that's the easiest way to make sure that you connect with the camera lens. But it's also a natural tendency to want to see the people that you're speaking to. So it's more of a practicing of looking at the camera than it is of there's something that you're doing wrong. It's just a natural tendency for us to want to look at other people who are on the screen. So just practicing by looking at the camera lens and practicing with the object and holding it in front of various angles so that you're able to see what's being viewed on the screen.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So yeah, nothing fancy to elevate it. You can certainly stack books or whatever you have to make sure that it's eye level, but that's the easiest way to maintain eye contact with the camera lens, is to make sure that it's eye level.
Any other questions? Well, it looks like we're close to 4. So on that note, we will close for today. Thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you, Dr. Mixon, for an excellent and informative presentation. A lot of takeaways today. Next week, we have our professional development series on the 3-minute thesis presentation. You'll learn how to concisely present your research. We hope you can join us. Go to the graduate school website, professional development, to get all the details on our professional development seminars. So have a great rest of your day and week, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you all. Bye-bye.